Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
You are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Turn our attention next to another kind of relatively fresh hot potato. This didn't used to be one of those subjects that lends itself to the tabloids' 2 minutes of hate every morning when we were younger. In fact, it's only in the last few years that it seems to have become an issue. But of course, it's been an issue forever. History is punctuated with people who felt that they'd been born into the wrong gender. It's just that historically they were expected to shut up and get on with it and either live, if you like, a lie, according to their own feelings and possibly biology, or to actually live as the other gender without getting any support or succour from society. 2 years, this is very, very much a work in progress for me, this issue. Why are we talking about it today? Because there is an NHS questionnaire that will ask primary school pupils if they feel comfortable with their gender. And I often express a degree of incredulity at the spluttering outrage that passes for journalism in on many issues. But this one, because it's so new, it just seems utterly baffling to me. 2 years ago, hand on heart, I think I would have said that I don't believe in gender fluidity. I don't, because I'd never really come across it. It was a bit more than 2 years, wasn't it? So 5 years ago, I'd never really come across it. It seemed to me to be a little bit hard to believe. And I tried, like, whenever I don't understand stuff, you're left with a choice, aren't you? You either find these people who describe themselves as transgender or gender fluid, or feel that they've been born into the wrong gender, even the words are confusing. So if I make mistakes, I'm up for correction. Let's make that absolutely clear. And what you do, you either decide that it's somehow weird and beyond your comprehension and then start, I'm sorry, but abusing these people and calling them names and saying you don't believe them, or you try and work out what you've got wrong. Because I can't quite conceive of circumstances in which somebody born a man would have his penis removed because of a fad or a fashion, or because they've been brainwashed or something like that. I can, however, conceive of circumstances in which a young woman, a teenage girl who is feeling lesbianism dawning within her, for want of a better phrase, I can see how bad influences might make her question whether or not she has gender issues. So some of the stories about breasts being bound and people being actively encouraged to go down the transgender path, where it may just be a homosexual scenario that they're in, I can also understand. So it's a very roundabout way of saying that this is the least black and white subject that we ever discuss. It really is. Because I can see some sense in almost every corner of the argument, except those who just use it as an excuse to bully. The big breakthrough for me, oddly, was equal marriage, when, obviously I'm a fully paid-up member of the equality lobby and believe that if we could just start treating everybody the same, treating our neighbour as we would hope to be treated ourselves, regardless of what sex, what gender, what sexuality, what colour, what creed they were, then I genuinely believe the world will be a better place. It's how I was raised, and I always will believe that. However much evidence to the contrary might be collated, I'll always believe that we could all get along better if we just stopped looking for reasons to hate each other. But on equal marriage, when I was banging my drum and calling people who had a problem with it names and sort of buying into that notion that if you don't build Rome in a day, then you're a bigot, I changed on that, because I go to church and I know a lot of people who are much older than me, and I realised it was epic what they were being asked to take in. Not because they were homophobic or bigoted or backwards or medieval or any of those things, but because they were so used to something that to be told there was something somehow wrong with it, which is the implicit suggestion, isn't it? The implicit suggestion is, when they bring in equal marriage legislation, that the way we as Catholics have been doing it for the last 2,000 years is wrong. You should have been marrying men to each other, and you should have been marrying women to each other. And that implicit criticism, that implicit insult, I think is one that some of the loudest voices on the pro-equal marriage lobby sometimes miss. It's just a question of respect. I think you're right, and that marriage should be equal, even marriage before God. But I also recognise that a lot of people who have never even had that thought before are going to struggle with being essentially barked at and told that they're wrong. And that's why some of the people who are spooked, perhaps for want of a better word, by the transgender, the acceleration of transgender issues in the British media, some of the people that are spooked by it are utterly within their rights and not remotely part of a problem. They're just moving slowly. And I was one of them. I didn't quite believe in it, you know. Then I met a fella who was born as a girl, and he came in for a 10-minute chat in the studio, stayed for an hour, and that changed me a bit. But then I started sliding back. It was a while since I'd seen him. It was a while since, and he busted me at the end. I went for the handshake. Normally, after I've had quite a meaningful studio experience, like a proper interview, a real heart-searching interview, I'd go in for a man hug. And I went in for and he busted me. He said, "You don't know what to do you?" And I said, "No, I don't. And I know that you're a man, but I can't." And he goes, Don't worry. You don't have to understand it all on the first meeting. But I want to understand it, and that is what perhaps distinguishes me from some other people in this profession. It must be true. That was the other point that emerged in the intervening years, because I can't really betray confidences, but people who've got in touch with me, some in the public eye, to tell me that they're dealing with this issue within their own family, and they have to kind of balance championing their children's cause with respecting their own children's privacy. There is no way that the massive majority of children who go through some sort of gender transition, there's no way they're doing it for fun or for faddishness. They're doing it, and this is what you've heard callers tell me on this programme, because again, as with the last conversations about grooming, if you ask the right questions, then people who actually know what they're talking about will pay you the compliment of ringing in. If you ask the wrong questions, you can melt the switchboard with lots of really, really angry people, and that can make great radio too, but it's not the kind of radio that we make together every day. So when parents started ringing in, just describing the depression and the sadness of their children when those children felt that they were living in the wrong body, to allow them the freedom to live as they thought they were made, as they believed they were made. Overnight, the change in these children is immense. So again, I can't imagine anybody undergoing severe surgery for faddish reasons. There will always, in any population, be people who swim against the tide of common sense, but the massive majority of anybody contemplating drugs or surgery later in life will do so after a huge period of contemplation and cogitation. And then I also sympathise with people who don't really understand why we're making such a fuss about this now. The notion that this survey, this questionnaire that the Daily Telegraph has gone big with today, that the children will be asked, do you feel the same inside as the gender you were born with? Yes, miss. I genuinely don't. I can't quite imagine the 10-year-old who would have a problem with this. In fact, the only 10-year-olds I can imagine who might be in any way troubled by this question would be the ones who are troubled by gender issues, because you can vaguely remember what it was like to be 10. You wouldn't. I have no more confusion about my gender than I have sexual feelings for men. I mean, it's not even debatable. It's not even a grey area. I cannot imagine being sexually attracted to a man. I cannot imagine feeling that my own sex was anything other than male. So who would be troubled by this stuff? Answer, perhaps the people who have got some confusions and some issues. And if you can address and find them when they're 10, then they won't grow up into rage-filled, repressed denialists. That's my view, because the only people I can imagine getting angry about this are the ones I've just described. Confused, yes, of course. A little bit spooked by the speed with which it's become a major national issue, yes, but that's largely because of the outrage that is so easy to provoke. And where does the outrage come from? 0345 606 0973. Imagine you were 10, okay? Imagine I asked you whether you feel the same inside as the gender you have outside. Yeah? And imagine not knowing what the answer to that question was. Because those are the children we're talking about. aren't they? Unless I've got this completely backwards. We're not talking about the children like me or like my children who wouldn't even hesitate to answer that question. We're talking about the children who would hesitate. So why do we spend all our time talking about the imagined damage it might do to the children who wouldn't hesitate? Why does this particular issue enrage and... what's the word I'm looking for? Just leads to insult. If somebody tells you that they are confused about their gender or gender fluid, you don't have to necessarily believe them. You may struggle to understand them. Why would you want to abuse them? 0345 6060 973. Hit the numbers now, you will get through. Come at this from whatever angle you want. And I'll tell you now, this is a subject which, by dint of trying to do it in a nuanced, informed way, rather than just picking a side and shouting, I will upset almost every corner of this conversation by recognising that the other side have a point. And that is, again, kind of the point. You have to listen to everybody in order to get close to what is likely to prove to be truth. It's 11:31. The headline's pretty straightforward. Trans survey for 10-year-olds. And I'm a great student of... in fact, I'm writing a book about it. The ease with which people in my profession can just sow division and fury and hatred. It's the comfort of anger that people feel. And trans issues in the last couple of years have become pretty much the biggest button pusher for people who treat anger as a commodity, treat anger and take confusion and turn it into fear and turn that itself into a business model, which is quite an arrogant way of me asking what on earth there is to be worried about. You ask a 10-year-old, do you feel the same inside as the gender you were born with? And the 10-year-old in 99% of cases, probably 99-point-something% of cases, says, yes, I do. Next question, what's for tea? And then in the tiny, tiny number of cases where actually this does illustrate confusion, illustrate a problem, those kids can be found and helped really early. I honestly mean this. I don't see any other way of interpreting the stories. You're perfectly entitled to say, I don't believe in gender fluidity. But that's a bit like saying that, you don't believe in mixed race children. They just exist, they're there, they're telling you, they're showing you, and you choose not to believe them. So why do people get so upset about this? 0345 6060 973. And am I mad when I suggest that no 10-year-old on the planet is going to be remotely spooked by this question unless they're completely echoing their parents' problems? Their parents will be spooked by it for all the reasons that we've listed. But no 10-year-old, it's just weird. 11:36 is the time. Sophie is in Sheffield. Sophie, what would you like to say?
Good morning, James. I'm not a caller to LBC, and I'm
you are now.
My grandmother, really.
You are now, Sophie. You are now, mate.
But to be honest, I'm absolutely confused that you can't see the difference between gender, which is a thing that society imposes on us, and sex, which is our physical genitals, really. That's what it comes down to. And what gender is if you're born a girl, you're put in pink immediately.
Yes.
And if you're a boy, you're put into blue. A boy is brought up hard toys, trucks, guns...
No, I do understand all that. I probably haven't explained myself very well. Tell me what you think I don't understand.
Well, for example, this 10-year-old survey.
Yes.
In the morning, the boy and the girl, they're out in the playground. There's a tree. They're allowed to climb the tree. But the girl, in her skirt, is not allowed to.
Yeah.
Because she's not allowed to show her underwear. For whatever reason.
No, that doesn't...
We say, you can't do that.
No, it
so
doesn't.
she can't climb
Maybe
the tree.
when we were young, but that doesn't happen anymore.
Oh, it does. It absolutely does. Yeah, it absolutely does.
Well, it doesn't happen in my children. I can't get them out of trees.
Children, but then your children are very unlikely to come out as trans, James, because they haven't been brought up in those sort of circumstances.
What sort of circumstances?
Come back to gender.
No. You can't. Just what sort of circumstances would make a child come out as trans? Because I have friends who have, and they're raising their children identically to how I'm raising mine.
Well, you've got to let me talk.
I am. I'm just telling you.
Well, if you're bringing up a boy,
the
boy likes pink, and you say, no, that is absolutely wrong, you can't like pink, you're a boy. So the boy then takes that in, and he still likes pink, he still likes to play with dolls, he still likes to care for the little baby doll, but then he's told that that is not okay. So he either represses that and becomes a macho boy that doesn't cry and becomes our standard of boy gender, not boy sex, boy gender, and then that boy then, if he keeps doing that, they'll say, oh, he's persistent, he's consistent, he keeps saying that he likes girl things, therefore he must be a girl. That is an absolute nonsense that you can decide whether a girl is a boy or a girl.
But that's not what people who've transitioned describe. That's not the experience that any of them describe.
So you're saying then that because they're confused about gender, bearing in mind that they're children, you know, they're not allowed to vote. They're not.
Well, maybe confused is the wrong word. It's everybody else is confused. If someone asked me, do you feel the same on the inside as your genitals define you on the outside? Is it 150%? Yeah, of course I do. I'm absolutely fine. But some children don't. We know that some children don't.
Oh, man, you've lived life. You know the difference.
No, but I'd have been the same when I was 10, Sophie. So would you.
But a child is being told. They don't know. They've got no comprehension.
No, but of course they have a comprehension. Of course they do. They know exactly what.
Of course they don't. They're 10 years old. When you get.
Have you ever met one?
Old,
have you ever met one of these children?
I have.
And did you tell them they were liars?
They're not lying. They're absolutely not lying.
But you have a little boy who is living as a little boy and is miserable and unhappy and self-harming, and when they try to work out why, he makes it clear that he feels like a little girl. So you let him live like a little girl, and suddenly his happiness returns, the self-harming stops, the depression and the suicidal thoughts are assuaged, and that's just a good thing, mate, isn't it?
No, it's not.
So you think it's better that he stays depressed and unhappy and self-harming?
You've got the wrong genitals. How can that be a good thing? And also, can you describe to me the difference between living as a boy and living as a girl?
Yes, I can. It's what you wear, it's how you have your hair, it's what you sort of, how you engage with other children, how they treat you, what you do with yourself. Mostly, entry level on this one, mostly it would be, in the case of one young, and again, I don't even know whether to say boy or girl, but his dad says boy. So one little boy I know has long blonde hair, wears dresses, and is, 500 times happier than he was when he was still living as a boy. Again, I think we're at cross purposes, and it's unlikely that either of us is going to convert the other. But at what age do you think you should start talking about these things?
I think you should start bringing them up when you're talking about any sexual thing at all. And you don't talk to 10-year-olds about sex a great deal. You just give them...
How do they know whether or not how do they know whether or not what Uncle Bob is doing to them in the garden shed every Friday night is right or wrong if you've not talked to them about sex?
Oh, you do talk to them about sex, but you don't talk to them about sex in that way. You just...
In what way?
There are private parts of their body that other people are not allowed to touch without your express permission.
Yes, but remember that you began this call by reminding us that has nothing to do with gender.
No, it doesn't.
So when do you talk to them about gender?
You can bring it up in all kinds of ways.
Well, this seems like a pretty good way to do it, doesn't it? I can't. I'm trying to imagine the child that you're feeling protective towards. Do you feel the same inside as the gender you were born with? Yeah, of course I do. Next question, what's for tea? And now you've got a child in your mind
are they, James?
that is damaged by this question.
Because if that little boy is happy with long hair and dresses, it doesn't make him a girl. It just makes him a boy who likes long hair and dresses.
Oh, okay. So you want to tell him what he is?
Yeah, absolutely.
And these people want them to tell
him the wrong genitals.
No. You want to tell him what he is, not decide for himself.
Take that little boy's genitals away.
I've got it.
Replace them with something else.
No, well, you don't know, do you? That's the surgery that happens 10, 15 years down the line, and in most transgender cases, there isn't any surgery. So you're uncomfortable with his freedom to define himself.
No, I want him to have as much freedom as...
No, you don't, because you don't want him to be able to call himself a girl. So let's talk about you very briefly. So, Sophie, let's talk about you very briefly. He wants to be a girl. He wants to live as a girl. He wants to be treated as a girl, and he wants to call himself a girl. Why do you think he shouldn't be allowed to do that?
I do, but I think that he has to know that liking girls' things doesn't make him a girl. It just means that he likes pink.
No, I've just told you what he feels. I've told you what he feels.
No, but how can you... What if you tell tells you that he is, there's this new thing, because it actually does expand. They become furkin, so that they now can identify as an animal. And that is actually, what they're going to do, start...
Okay, and this is the point where I think we both agree that we've had a slightly sensible conversation, but now it's gone nuts. Presumably because you're identifying as a squirrel. Harry is in Ealing. Harry, what would you like to say?
Hi. If a boy comes to me and says that he feels, like a girl inside, etc., I would have to correct him and say, you're not a girl. It's only in your mind that you think that.
And how do you know that?
Because it's only in his mind.
No, but how do you know that? What are your... I mean, forgive me, this will sound a little patronising, but in terms of psychology or... medicine or research. What gives you the right to say that?
I'm only based on what I see. I'm not.
So you'd have to look in his pants before you could answer his question, then.
No, I know it's.
Well,
a
what
boy.
do you mean by what you see, then?
But what I see is a boy.
Well, how do you know it's a boy?
Because his parents told me.
Well, there you go then. So the parents have the right to tell you what gender their child is?
No, because the child is too young.
Which child?
Know.
Which child is too young to know?
The child we're talking about. The child that we're talking about.
The one that you can see?
Yes.
Okay, and when a child at the age of 10 says, I really do feel happier as a girl, why does that bother you?
It doesn't bother me. I'm just correcting the child.
Okay, why does it strike you as incorrect?
Because it's a boy I'm looking at, and it's not a girl. His birth certificate.
So it is just, I mean, and all of the people born, all the people born intersex physically, all the people born with confused genitalia, all the people over the centuries who've been misaligned their gender and have only reversed it later in life, because quite often, as any gynecologist will tell you, or any midwife will tell you, quite often it's not immediately obvious what gender a child is. What's wrong with them?
Well, if you're saying immediately it doesn't, well, not in 10 years it would.
No, it wouldn't. Some people have been living the wrong sort of life for 12 years. Intersex is fascinating. It's not the same as transgender. But I guess what I'm driving at, mate, is why you care.
Why do I care?
Yeah.
It's not I generally care, but if it's a child...
you must care. You've phoned a radio station. You don't ring in every day. They're right. It's the same with Sophie, the last caller, who defined herself at the beginning as someone who doesn't ring radio stations. If all of the people that work in this field accept and recognise the existence of people who have been born with the wrong bits between their legs, that inside they feel female and outside they are demonstrably male. Why does that bother you?
Because I'm trying to understand what inside...
But you're not trying to understand anything, are you? Because you're telling them that they're wrong, remember? When you rang in, you said, I would correct them, I would tell... So you're not trying to understand anything.
No.
I'm trying to understand why it bothers you.
Okay, I'm not going to try to understand from the child, because the child doesn't know any better. So if a professional was to say this to me, what you've just put to me, that internally he feels like a female.
Yes.
I would want to know what internally is telling him that.
Well, why don't you ask him instead of telling him that he's a boy?
No, but you said to me, that's what I said. I asked the child.
Well, then you would find out. Then you would find out, and they would explain to you that I feel. No, the child does know. Again, okay. Again, I'm left wondering why you literally, Harry in Ealing, why you care about this. All of the parents that have been through this do it with such enormous reluctance. It's heartbreaking to think that you have a child with this condition. And they are in denial, they grieve, they mourn, and then they recognise that their child's happiness depends upon action. And you don't want them to take that action. And I'm just wondering why you care.
The reason I care is because this child can grow up later and could regret it, which there has been cases.
Could regret answering a question at the age of 10?
No, could regret answering its own mind.
Pardon?
His own mind.
He could regret answering his own mind?
Yes.
And that's why you care, because a child could regret answering his own...
Because it could trouble the child later on in life.
The answer they gave to a question at the age of 10 could trouble a child later on in life?
Correct, yes.
Well, fine. It's very caring of you, Harry. It's 11:47. Emma writes, I knew that I was not hetero at 5 and not cis at 10. This caller does not give kids the credit for being able to interpret their own life experiences. That might be part of it. Transitioning doesn't always involve surgery. She goes on, as I get older and like everyone else on this planet, reconcile the bits of me that don't fit with society with my idea of my own internal self. I can only think that these people don't understand the disconnect, the damage that can be inflicted by feeling isolated from your fellow humans from a very young age. We're social creatures that require community alongside calcium. To be rejected by your species because of an essential part of yourself is like being exposed on a hillside, Roman fashion. I can attest to the difference it makes to your inner landscape to realise that you are merely a variance upon a spectrum and not a factory second. I understand that, but as Emma knows, because she keeps quite a close eye on me on these sort of issues, and I've been doing this job long enough now, it feels like we know each other. Oh, I suppose we do in a way. I'm nowhere near as close to where she is as I would like to be, but I just find with any issue that I find confusing, talk to the people living it, rather than those of us charged with having a pungent opinion about it. And the more we talk about transgender and gender dysphoria, the idea, as Sophie in Sheffield probably articulated, that it's somehow a choice. It's as if this isn't, this is externally inflicted upon you by society rather than something that is born within you as part of you. Then I think back to, presumably, if I'd been a radio phone-in host 30 years ago, actually it happened even recently. You've still got people who think that sexuality is a choice, who think that if you teach children about homosexuality, you'll somehow increase the chances of them being homosexual. The notion that it can somehow be contagious, or the notion that it's somehow a lifestyle choice, which, again, I acknowledge, and I apologise in advance for offending the people I'm about to describe, some clowns still think is true, but it means they've never spoken to a gay person, really, or at least they've never made any attempt to understand people who are different from them. So this notion that asking 10-year-olds, and I'm not convinced that this is the right age or the right question, but I'm fascinated by people whose heads explode at the very thought of it, because I've never met a 10-year-old who couldn't answer that question with incredible ease and then move on to the next one. I guess there's the utilitarian bit, isn't there, where you say, well, all right, this might help one child in 1,000 who genuinely does have some form of dysphoria, but, you know, what's the point of confusing the other 999? And I get that, but I'm not sure it would confuse the other 999. I think that's the point. The only kid who's going to be confused by this question is the kid who's confused about sex and gender, and that's the kid who might have some form of gender dysphoria, and the sooner you get a handle on that, the better. But hey, what do I know? Mark's in Bexley. Mark, what would you like to say?
Oh, hi, James. Thanks for taking my call.
You're very welcome.
I apologise if I sound a little bit shaky. I'm just a little bit nervous.
It's only me, Mark. It's only me. What's the worst? What's the worst that can happen?
Well, I've been listening to you recently, and you keep saying how there's like 1 million people listening to your show, so that's probably why I'm a little bit nervous.
Only me listening to you now. Forget about everybody else. Anyway, I don't mention it that often, do I?
A couple of times.
Go on.
No, so basically, I'm saying pretty much on your side. I mean, when it comes to trans issues, I do kind of treat them with caution. I'm a gay man myself.
Right.
So although I'm not trans, I do sort of understand the whole kind of coming out process and the difficulties that presents.
I guess you're younger than me, I think, but presumably there are still people around who don't think that you're actually gay. They think that you're somehow ill, or you're somehow because you can't, in the same way that you cannot be a girl on the inside if you're a boy on the outside. You cannot fancy boys if you're a boy. Is it the same thing? Do you hear the same thing? I think I do, but I don't have a personal stake in it like you do.
Yeah, I mean, generally nowadays, I'm 30, and most of the people that I've come out to, in fact, I think pretty much all the people I've come out to, they do understand that it's not a choice. It is just what it is. You're just born with it. But of course, there is definitely still, demonstrated by your last couple of callers, that there is sort of still this belief that we can somehow confuse children.
Yes.
That if you talk about something too much, if you teach about gay sex in schools, if you talk about transgender issues, it's going to confuse children, and that they might end up being that thing. And it's just, it's just ridiculous. I mean, I think those last two callers that you spoke to, I mean, I think they should ask themselves if they'd been asked about transgender issues, if they'd been asked about
Yes.
gay issues or whatever, would they have become that thing? Like, I really don't think they would have, and I think they would accept that they probably wouldn't.
You could have asked me 100 times when I was 10 whether or not I fancied fellas, and you could have been asked 100 times whether or not you fancied girls, and we both would have given the same answer 100 times.
Exactly. Well, I wouldn't have. I would have given the other answer because I wouldn't have wanted people to know.
Oh, okay.
But yeah, in my
But you'd have
head,
known in
yeah,
your
definitely.
heart. That's an interesting one, because I'm a little... I don't know that I actually said this, but the suggestion from Natasha Devon, who, of course, got monstered by the tabloids a couple of weeks ago for suggesting that if you've got a room full of children, you should say hello children instead of hello boys and girls. She says that I've suggested that if people say this will confuse children, what they really mean is my inner child is really confused. I think she's allowed to extrapolate that from the conversations that we've had. But then you find yourself essentially calling the two callers that you've referred to, they're describing their own insecurities while pretending that they're concerned about other children.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you know, when I was growing up, I mean, I remember my parents probably saying it a couple of times when I was kind of hitting puberty. I think, you know, I seem to remember them saying a couple of times that, you know, I can't remember exactly how they would have put it, but essentially, if you're gay, you know, it's not a problem. You could
God, you're
talk
lucky.
to us. You can always tell us. And I know that because most of my friends are actually straight.
Sure.
And I know that a lot of their parents have said the same things to them, and it didn't confuse them. I grew up gay, they grew up straight. It was nothing to do with the questions that we were asked. It was just reassurance from our parents. And I think this question, you know, asking children when they're 10, you know, which again is kind of roughly the age when they're going to be hitting puberty, I think asking that question at that age, it's not going to cause mass confusion. It's like you said, they're just going to answer the question yes or no, or they may... You know, it's the ones that hesitate that... Do
you know what else I've remembered as well from when... And we haven't done... I don't know whether it's a sign of progress. I think we're living in an era where most of these things feels like they're all moving backwards at the moment. But the homophobia is no longer mainstream. I fear that some of the usual suspects with newspaper columns and the like have replaced that othering of gay people now. Trans is like the new whipping boy or girl, if you will. And it's the thing that you're allowed to say vile thing. I don't believe in it. I don't think that... which you get into trouble now. Now, if you said it about gay people, 20 years ago, you probably would have been fine. But whenever I had an absolutely stone-cold homophobe on the line, arguing with me that men like you had chosen their sexuality, I always used to say, why would anybody choose to live like that in a world where you exist? In a world where the hatred that you direct at these people, why would they choose to be the recipient or the receptacles of that hatred? And I think it's probably going to be very similar with trans, isn't it? Is that when people look at the news coverage, when they hear the stories, when they see the comment sections, or even when they hear it on the radio, anybody who is struggling with it is arguably going to be put back a step or two.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, to me, it just seems that there's a complete breakdown in logic, you know, because, like you said, I mean, I can't really... We're going
to run out of time, but yeah, thank you. And again, I fully accept that I could be wrong, but it's what I'm wrong about that's confusing, because when I see somebody else's anger and I seek to understand it, I cut him off too early. I've got to get the hang of this crescendo. I thought I could have let Mark finish, the poor fella. I'll get the hang of this one day. And the latest hot potato of tabloid provocation concerns us not for the first time. Talking about transgender issues, gender dysphoria, and a plan by an NHS trust to ask 10-year-olds, year 6 children, whether they feel the same inside as the gender they were born with. Is it necessary? I don't know enough about it to have a really strong view, but I do know the parents of children who have made an incredibly difficult and always reluctant decision to let their little one live as a different gender from the one their genitals assign, and they routinely report an astonishing upsurge in general happiness. So that would seem to me to be a sign of parental love and concern. They're also asked to tick a box to confirm their true gender with options of boy, girl and other. And given that we now know lots of grown-ups who tell us they are other, what's wrong with recognising this? There may be things wrong with it. You're more than welcome to tell me, but I will probably ask you why you care so much. And if you're asking me why I care so much, then very simply, the answer is that I've spoken to these people, and I just think that the suffering is unnecessary and easily rectified. Starting with a conversation. Do I also worry? I'll read you a couple of texts. I'll be with you, Michaela, imminently. There was one a few that are quite amusing. Stop wearing jeans and shirts, O'Brien. Wear a frock and high heels and be normal and comfortable, says Paul. I am normal and comfortable. Normal is a very odd word to use, but I'm perfectly comfortable in jeans and shirts, mate. That's possibly evidence of you either not as funny as you think you are, or missing the point even more spectacularly than you realise. Immediately after, James, historically men have worn dresses as the Normans. In some cultures they still do. So what if it became the norm for men to wear dresses and wear makeup? What do you think potential trans would say about why they feel they are the opposite sex? I have absolutely no idea what you're talking about. If people are born gay, then why is it only in white countries that are filled with gays? The same goes for trans. Good Lord, all human life is here today. And John in Tooting says, and this is interesting, when I was young I wanted to be a girl and have a boyfriend because I started to fancy the boys at school, but I'm gay, not trans. And if I had done that, it would have been a disaster. At 10, you're too young to know what's what, but most are gay rather than trans that feel like that. That's an interesting wrinkle. That's an interesting concern. So if you're ringing me up to say, I'm very worried about this gender assignation because I think that young gay lads at 10 might make the mistake of thinking that they're trans when really they're just gay. That would be an interesting conversation to have, but that's not really the point that most people unhappy with this sort of stuff routinely find themselves making. Michaela is in Morden. Michaela, what would you like to say?
Hi. Just thinking back to some of your earlier callers, then you're absolutely right. What they need to do is to listen to young children. So this question on the form isn't going to confuse anybody who's not trans, and it may help those who are. I work with young children from 3 upwards, and none of them have the slightest concern about working with trans people. They may ask a question or two, but really all they're interested in is the things that are important in life to them, getting on with whatever they're getting on with, and they're looking to adults to help them with that and to inspire them with that and so on. For young trans people, then quite clearly this may help because it helps to identify their concerns and their needs. And that's what would be, medically diagnosed from there on in. The idea that somebody may be misdiagnosed and somehow sent down the wrong treatment path is very, very small.
Or the idea that a journalist is better qualified than a diagnostician. I mean, that's really, I know that's emblematic of the British media at the moment, but these are the moments at which I have to sort of pinch myself and make sure I'm not dreaming.
Yeah, absolutely, and the medical pathways that are associated with this for young children and adults are, professional services populated by professional people. They're not trying to push an agenda or.
There are elements that could be accused of trying to push an agenda, though. Are there? I mean, there is a kind of very. Very passionate. I could have said militant, but I'm trying to be a bit more diplomatic than that. And that's kind of who I refer to when I talk about expecting everybody else to move as quickly as they do. It's not easy for everybody.
Yes, that's a slightly different question, but
it is
a valid. But within the NHS pathway, these are people who are being very objective and they're very professional. The militancy that you're talking about there, yeah, I mean, it is disappointing to me too when I find people who are, as you say, expecting others to move more quickly or finding a fence where none is meant. It is working in tandem with people, in concert with, the community and public at large to bring things along, to not to push people along, but to lead them along. Inherently trans people are really just wanting to get on with life and enjoy it and build a good and successful life as other people are.
What do you hear then when you hear people very, very cross about it? I've tried to avoid the actual kind of manufactured outrage today because it's not helpful to anybody, but some people are absolutely furious about this. What do you hear when you hear them?
Indeed. Well, there are two sides to things. For young people, it's that, there's a transgender lobby, which is almost ludicrous or cabal. I mean, there's just a few of us that are trying to push children into being transgender. That's an absolutely insane and insulting and disgraceful suggestion.
But actually, as a fear, it's rational in a sense. It displays an ignorance of what transgender means. or what gender dysphoria means, you can just look at the NHS website if you're confused. That is the NHS, the National Health Service, not the NUJ, the National Union of Journalists. It's the NHS website where you can find out what it means. But if you, just in terms of, I remember when my mum's hairdresser told my mum that I wasn't gay when I was about 11, he was gay, and it was his way of saying to mum, you know, his life will be easier than mine was. So you could see why a parent wouldn't want to have a trans child, out of love and thinking that their life will be more difficult than it needs to be, and therefore a fear of somehow being persuaded into it, though a little bit daft, doesn't make them nasty.
No, absolutely not. So, people who have a genuine concern are, the awareness and the services that are coming along are help to address those concerns, not to override them, not to tell anybody that you're wrong on that, because you have. It's addressing those concerns and demonstrating that they can be done with care, with the best interest of the child at heart, to enable them to have a future life and a good quality of life, and to feel confident about doing that. It's about enabling people to be themselves. And as you mentioned, being gay sort of 40 or 50 years ago, parents would have a concern about that, not necessarily because, of internal bigotry, but because of what the impact of that is.
Because bigotry exists. They may not have been proponents of it themselves, although plenty of young people did have that horrible experience of being sort of disowned and thrown out of home. Still do. There's a story in the newspapers today about an American Jehovah's Witness who had that experience, but it could be out of protection. So some of the people who are spooked by this aren't noticing the effort that's being put into spooking them, and the kind of tone of the coverage that's designed to make them frightened and confused and angry, and not noticing that while simultaneously thinking, well, I don't want my children growing up with this target on their back, so I'm trying to protect them from precisely the kind of bigotry that's made me confused and angry in the first place.
And that's what I would say. Those people who are acting with the best interest, because of course they're concerned about the hostility of the big wide world for their young children, who if they will grow up and adopt, either being trans or gay or whatever, then there's concern that the wider society is a hostile world. So these are people with protective elements about them, and absolutely that has to be commended. What we have to do is to build a society where those protections aren't considered necessary because the target isn't on the back. I mean, recently there was a case where a trans woman went to New Zealand and claimed asylum there and was granted that because of the perception of public hostility here in the UK.
Is that right?
Say that in my case, I've never really experienced anything to that degree at all.
Right.
But that's to invalidate her in her case.
And I would ask you, now that you've referred to your own situation, because I'm trying to learn the ropes here, Michaela, so I thought I'm not going to ask, but my cogs are whirring in my mind as I listen to you. But do you welcome the public conversation, even though it's so unpleasant at the moment? Is it a move towards, in the same way that really we wouldn't have ever got to a place where we have equal marriage if we hadn't actually given some oxygen to the homophobes, so that the debate moves into the mainstream? And while the debate must be very hard listening for people who have gender dysphoria, it's better than keeping everything under wraps, or not? I don't know. I honestly don't know. That's why I asked you the question.
Totally agree. This is better out in the open, because if it in the way that would help no one. And so what I say is that when we bring an issue like this out into the open, we find that people come with us, and that's fine, and we welcome that. If somebody wishes to stay behind with their bigotry, then that's fine. We leave them behind as long as they don't try and influence others with their bigotry or whatever.
And that's the problem. I almost want a better word than bigotry, actually. Now it's just a kind of slowness or a stubbornness. I don't know how you tell the difference between the people that enjoy. It's like the difference between people who believe lies and people who tell them. The people who enjoy the outrage and the fury, it keeps them back. In some cases, it pays the bills. It keeps them warm at night. And the people who I really first appreciated during the equal marriage debate, who just struggle with the pace of change. You can bring that into immigration as well. It's equally hard to tell the difference between people who just struggle with the pace of change and would be a lot more relaxed about immigration if they were given a little bit more space and time, as opposed to the people who think that your skin colour really is an indicator of who and what your value is. 12:15 is the time. There is another story around. Michaela, thank you. I hope we'll talk again. There is another story around about the way that dads are portrayed in popular culture, which I think might cross over a little bit. So we'll try and include that. But I find this fascinating and also confusing. It's tough for me. I remember a couple of... even after meeting Fox, the fellow I told you about earlier, who has transitioned from female to male, even after meeting him, I still found myself occasionally thinking, why do they have to do this? Why do they have to have these conversations? Why do they have to ask these questions? And then I did a simple thing. I imagined that I was 10 again, and how these questions would impact on me. So, do you feel the same inside as the gender you were born with? Yes, Mum. What's for tea? It's 12:16. It's a conversation that I'm rather proud that we've managed to have in the way that we have. I'm confused. I don't get it. But I know parents of young children who feel, or who, in a couple of cases, have been diagnosed with gender dysphoria. In one case, I didn't even know until after I'd done a radio show on it, and an acquaintance got in touch and said, actually, that you were talking about me without realising it today. And putting the concern of those children first and foremost, you would try to identify who they are by asking them how they feel. But this upsets a huge number of adults. And there are sort of wrinkles in it. Of course there are. Quite a lot of gay people getting in touch. It seems to be one of the subjects that you are at the moment more comfortable... Actually, no, I say that, the phone lines are full as well. But the notion that because you were... Here's a good example. I've known I was gay from a very young age, and I've never wanted to be a girl. I used to pretend I had long hair and wear my sister's dresses and play with her toys, but the notion of being a girl never crossed my mind, and it's not something I've ever wondered about as an adult. I think it's also risky to correlate sexuality with gender identity, because I don't see how they're linked. My dad, who is straight, enjoys wearing women's clothes, a family secret I learned at a late age. But I don't think my dad secretly wants to be a woman. Gender identity is without a doubt genuine, complicated, psychological issue that is very real, and those who suffer it need our support and love, not condemnation and ridicule, which is symptomatic of the kind of texts I'm getting, which are amazing. I couldn't agree more with a recent text about feeling gay at 10 as distinguished from trans. I have always been concerned about this issue. I knew beyond any doubt I was gay at 10. I'm 52 now, so things weren't so easy then. Let's get this right. But never did I want to be anything but female, and it scares me that kids like me nowadays could be misunderstood, says Helen. And yet, in many ways, Helen, I took the opposite message from your message, because you said, I've known I was gay since I was 10. Never did I want to be anything but female. So I could have asked you when you were 10. Do you see? Unless I've misunderstood you. I understand you're imagining your 10-year-old self feeling... the stirrings of your sexuality, feeling gay, and somehow then wondering whether that meant you should have been a boy. And because we didn't really have trans on our compass when we were young, that opportunity, that possibility never would have occurred to you. But it would be no different from feeling gay or straight. So the fact that you knew at 10, you had no interest whatsoever in not being a woman, but equally you had no interest whatsoever in fancying men. You knew at 10. I don't think I've ever met a 10-year-old who'd be spooked by that question, unless their parents had somehow groomed them to be spooked. 0345 6060 973 is the number you need. Tony's in Oxford. Tony, what would you like to say?
Hi, Jane.
Hello, Tony.
Long-time listener and first-time caller.
You're very welcome.
Last year, our son told me and my wife that he was transgender. Now he was 46. He told us, and apparently he's known he's been different since he was 6. And as parents, we cannot believe how we've missed him being a transgender child. He kept everything in himself. I couldn't really identify him because he was very difficult to get to speak to as a child. But I got on well with him, but there was a barrier. And it's just so strange that we missed it as parents.
Oh, come on. Don't beat yourself up, Tony. You probably wouldn't even have known the word, would you, 40 years ago?
Well, no, he was born in 1970, so it'd been 1976 when he realised he was different.
Yeah.
Because he didn't realise... I mean, never ever showed anything feminine. Over the years, we've been looking back and thinking, we did find a brunette wig once, and he made out that it was for some party he had at work,
Yeah.
My wife did find some makeup, but then that was in the same story. But he used to apparently lock himself in his bedroom and dress completely as a woman. And we just had no inkling, But since he's told us, I now read everything I can. It's all talk on the radio and on the press about transgender. It's really come to the fore, and possibly this to do with this, the publicity that he's come out, but mainly because he's found a girlfriend, a lovely girl who has convinced him that he really ought to tell us, and it's working out absolutely perfectly between them. But it's a very strange relationship because he's like 6'2".
Yeah.
And when his mother can't really accept it at the moment, but I have 100%.
Gosh.
And I've been in her company, and there's my son, completely forgotten, and it's a girl, 6'2", absolutely beautiful, tall, slim, all the characteristics, well, more characteristics than a female. It's absolutely unbelievable. And so I've now got a beautiful daughter, and it's working fine.
His poor mum, though, because
but he's come out. He's come out, but I cannot believe it's taken all that time, And he's been married. He's been married. He's got a child, but that, of course, didn't last. We didn't know the reason why. He took up boxing as a child to try and prove that he was masculine, he tells us.
Yeah.
He's got quite a high-powered job, and he has to go in dressed as a male.
Does he?
But he wants to go in dressed as a female, but his boss tells him it's fine, whatever he does. But he got all the confidence in the world as a male, but as a female, he lacks complete confidence.
It's quite remarkable, isn't it? And I don't know what to say, because what you're living and what your child is living are the story that people like me somewhat arrogantly think we've got the right to lay down the law on the radio about. Has it been... I mean, what do you hear when you hear people ringing in radio phone-ins to essentially talk about people like your child in the most pejorative of terms?
People don't understand. If it hadn't happened to me in our family, I wouldn't understand. But I understand so much now. And I just realise it's not how you look; it's between your ears that this happens. He's got your sex is decided in the womb from about 6 weeks, 7 weeks old. So lots of us have got. People have said to me, well, I think I've got feminine ways, but I'm certainly never showed any tendency. But we've all got a certain amount of the opposite sexiness, I believe. That's how I look at it, and some go over a bit further over one way than the other.
We see it as a graph rather than a black and white. It's a spectrum is the word, isn't it? A spectrum rather than a.
But our son stroke daughter is so happy now, you wouldn't believe.
Can you talk to me about the difference? Tell me a little bit about the change now that it's off the chest, as it were.
As a male, he's always been aloof, very short. Doesn't bear falls.
Yeah.
But as a female, he used to love Formula One, racing, go-karting. You wouldn't believe it. He was into that sort of exciting sort of lifestyle and so interested. But now, that's all gone. He's on hormonal treatment as well. Only 2 weeks ago, he's been up to Harley Street and had his nose worked on to make him look more feminine, or her look more feminine. It's very difficult to talk about him or her. I don't really know what to say.
Nor do I. Nor do I. What does your child say?
Well, I mean, he doesn't quite know where to stop. This is the strange. What's upsetting us? He's going to have his Adam's apple looked at because that will higher his voice. But when he is my daughter, or our daughter, she speaks really feminine, but it's the transition is unbelievable.
How
I've looked people say, oh, transgender or cross-dresser. He's nothing like that. He's just definitely. Some days he feels more comfortable as a male, and another day, he wants to be a female. but it depends on the situation and where he's got to go to work. I mean, he comes into London a lot. He runs an office up there, and.
Well, it is, and it's the denial, it's the repression that causes the problem. So it doesn't necessarily mean that he wants to run around, dressed like Bet Lynch every day. He just wants to be free to put on the outside what he's feeling on the inside every day.
Mm.
Is that right?
I've been out with her for meals.
You're an amazing man, Tony. Can I ask how old you are? Do you mind how old you are?
Well, I'm 73. I mean...
so you weren't expecting to be dealing with this in the autumn of your years?
I thought I'd experienced everything in life, but never like that.
And can I ask about your wife? Because you mentioned that she's not finding it as easy as you are, and most people listening will completely sympathise with that position.
She cannot come to terms with it. She hasn't yet seen her.
Yeah.
She understands and will, and she says, "I support you," to her. But she can't visually see him in the flesh, or her in the flesh.
How hard was it for you?
Which I feel she's missing out on so much.
Aww.
Because I just wish he would come out. I mean, the whole family know. We've told everyone, close family, everyone's full support. And I've shown photographs. I walk around with photographs. And everyone is amazed,
Your family is this entire issue in microcosm. Because your daughter struggled, or rather your son struggled until your son became your daughter, at which point the struggle became a lot easier. You've managed to move with it, as I am trying to do, as a member of society without a personal investment. Your wife can't move with it, just like lots of other members of society who don't have a child with gender dysphoria. They can't move either. You've got almost every angle in your... And I can hear the sadness in your voice about the fracture that's still there, really.
Well, that is the sad side of it, really, because I feel as a mother, she missed all this and had brought him up as a son. Obviously, she had more dealings with him than I did.
Yeah.
Yet he's missed this, and now to suddenly put that in a box and now open up another one.
Is she cross or sad or confused or all of it?
You can't discuss it without, a bit of hysterics coming in.
Yeah, because it's so huge, isn't it?
I think, we should talk all about it and go to see, people who can help the situation, but it's got to come from within. I'm just hoping one day we'll all be sorted,
There's a lot of love for you coming in. And one big happy family. There's a lot of love coming in for you, Tony, into this studio, and I think that's why I do what I do, in the hope that someone who's just living it will give the rest of us a quick steer on what it is that we're banging on about and why.
There's nothing to be frightened of. It's
bless you.
Just go with the flow and try and understand, and as long as everyone's happy, that's what we're looking for.
You're great, mate. Take care. Kathleen speaks for an awful lot of people getting in touch with the programme when she writes in a text to 84850. In a tweet actually to @Mr James OB. I'm ploughing through my Christmas cards, going to all over the UK in good cheer with such a lovely bunch of warm, inclusive and informative callers this morning. You're telling me, and Emma writes, yet another little bit of hope in humanity rekindled by Tony's call. Thank you, I needed that. What a man. Could you be Tony? I don't know. Could you be Tony's wife? I don't know. If you're just tuning in, 46 years old when he came out to his parents as transgender or non-binary, and there's no shame in not being entirely clear on the vocabulary yet. We're all learning. Dad's embraced it. You could hear pride in his voice. I hope he doesn't mind me talking about him when he's not here anymore. You could hear proper pride in his voice, and there'll be some pride in the struggle that his child has been on, from son to daughter, as it were, but mum just can't. And that sums up this whole debate. But what world do you want to live in? A world where love and pride greet a human being being brave, or a world where fear and confusion? And what's wonderful about Tony's call was that no one's going to be monstering mum on this. Everyone's going to feel sorry for mum. It's only because It's our child that we're talking about, that we would avoid the insults and throwing abuse and using horrible terms or laughing about it, sniggering about it, or saying, I don't believe in it. You wouldn't do that because mum's so upset. Still, it's the undeniability of it, perhaps, and yet she will still be herself denying it. Oh, man.